Welcome to Best Ever, the show where we explore how effective self-management creates the foundation for positive leadership outcomes. I'm Scott Eblin, and in every episode, I sit down with notable leaders to uncover the routines, mindset shifts, and strategies that have helped them lead at the highest level, and the difference that's made for their organizations, families, and communities. My guest on Best Ever today is Lara Lee. Over the course of her career, Lara has held senior leadership roles at companies ranging from Harley-Davidson to Lowe's, where she was the president of the Orchard Supply Hardware Business Unit. In addition to leading her own consulting company, Creative Renewal, she now serves on a number of corporate boards, including WD-40. What makes Lara's story so interesting is the through line that's run across all of her experiences. She's an expert on the connection between culture and performance. She's also purposeful and passionate about the inner work of leadership, the reflection and growth it takes to lead with clarity and impact. Whether it's building global businesses, leading transformations, or helping organizations innovate, Lara has consistently shown how the way you manage yourself and the culture you create becomes the engine for the results you deliver. That makes her the ideal guest for Best Ever. Lara, welcome to the show.
Great to see you, Scott.
Oh, awesome. So we're going to talk a little bit about a little bit of a history we have together later, but I want to start out at the beginning. I alluded to this in the intro just now. You've had this multifaceted career, domestic and international, senior executive, consultant, board member in various industries. We're going to get to a lot of that in this conversation. What were the early life experiences that set you on such a rich and diverse path in your career? Looking back, what do you think the sparks were that led to everything you've done?
Well, Scott, I'm too old to care about dating myself, so I'll just say that, I grew up at a time when the Vietnam War was raging, and that was very disturbing. Obviously, for a young child, it was the first war to really be televised. And I also came from a family of folks who had, traveled pretty extensively around the world for various reasons. My grandmother was an intrepid traveler on freighter ships, in the 50s. And my dad put himself through school and then, erected radio towers in Iran and Africa and, my mom and so on. So I kind of felt myself a citizen of the world and I was seeing this very disturbing, situation in the world. And so I really was driven from an early age to want to do something that would connect people, build bridges, the feeling that if you could build relationships across the things that seem to divide us, that maybe we could have a peaceful and flourishing world. And that, we're all citizens of the world, it's one family, one world was kind of the way I grew up. And that's propelled me in one way or another throughout my career.
I love the fact that you started that way, and especially that word connection, because it's such a perfect segue to so much of what I want to talk about today. I mentioned in the intro that you're an expert, at this intersection of culture and strategy and execution. And I want to really zero in on the cultural aspect, that Venn diagram of the three. You've written a lot. You've done a lot of public speaking. Have a bit of a personal history with you, which we'll talk about. I know for sure from everything I know about you that you're very performance oriented, but you're also very people oriented, and that work needs to be about connecting with meaning and having a sense of meaning. Professionally, when did you make that connection? When did you come to that conclusion? I mean, you saw it as a young woman, traveling with your parents, but as your career developed, when did you really lock in on that connection around meaning?
It's an interesting question, Scott. I would say that for personally, meaning was already always very important. So I had this idealistic vision, connect people across the things that divide them. I decided to become a Chinese major because I was good at languages, but it was at a time when everyone thought Japan would be taking over the world, and China was barely just opened. And I thought, someone needs to go work with those people. So, why not me?
Yeah.
Right. And this idea, then I would, study Chinese and then I would go to business school thinking that commerce and trade historically has been what connects people. So this was a pretty idealistic vision that propelled me into my early career. And there were some twists and turns where it didn't seem to be on track, and then it got back on track. But that was very much, my self motivation. In parallel, I would say that our education system at the time, and I would venture to say even up till today, often it beats that out of us. It makes it very much about the logic and the mind and the function and the skill set, and not about, the human side of things, not about the heart connection, not connecting to meaning and purpose. That's become, more prominent in recent times, at least in the verbiage that people use. But a lot
Mm-hmm.
of companies, when push comes to shove, really revert to the hard skills and the
Right.
hard performance. So I would say for me, the arc of my development, over time was and I don't think this is unusual, right? Focus first on functioning, right? If you think of three aspects of human experience, will or motivation, functioning and capability, inner being state. So, first it was all about the functioning, acquire skills, acquire capabilities,
Mm-hmm.
acquire knowledge and experience and best practices. And, then it became, with other people understanding, oh, I really need to be a good leader and a good manager and a good transformation agent in a lot of the work I did. I need to connect with the heart side of people. I need to figure out how to connect them to purpose and meaning for themselves, connect us all to a bigger sense of purpose and meaning. And then eventually, it became a lot more about the inner work, right, on myself, and helping other people to develop their inner state so that they can become have more equanimity and be better able to self manage in the ups and downs. But maybe I'm getting ahead of ourselves
Well,
here.
you're going where I want to go for sure. Couple of definitional requests. Inner work is a term we hear a lot. What does that mean to you, inner work?
There are a number of different dimensions to it. There's a spiritual dimension, and there's a inner state self-management dimension, let's call it that. So inner state is being able to be very in touch with what is happening with you on the inside that is very likely affecting how you're perceiving the world and how you're showing up in the world. And that takes practice,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then the spiritual side is connecting to what enlivens you. It's what gives meaning and purpose beyond the external, beyond the, achievement or visible impact on the world. You could call it your reason for existence, your connection
Yeah.
to a divine source. Different people think about it in different
Sense of
ways.
purpose. Yeah. Why am I
Yeah,
here?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. We're just going to jump all over the place here. We're going deep quickly here, which I'm not surprised that we're doing that.
It's what we do,
I'm
Scott.
loving
It's
it. I'm
our
loving it. Yeah.
history.
So let me just, we've alluded to it too many times. So Laura and I know each other from, gosh, the mid 2000 teens, I guess, right?
Yeah,
2015 or somewhere in
16,
that range.
17, 18. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in that range. And I was selected by you to be your executive coach. And we'll come back to that, but that's the history
A
that we
very
have
good
together.
choice.
Well, thank you so much. I felt the same way about you as a client. Um, I want to. I said I had two definitional requests. One was inner work, and I want to go deeper on that in a minute. Equanimity was the other word that you used, which is a word that's probably on the SAT, right? So, what's equanimity mean to you, and how do you think about it in
Well,
the context of work life?
there's an even more obscure word I like better,
Okay, good.
but I'll explain why. It came from my great mentor, who you may have interacted with briefly, Carol Sanford,
Mm-hmm,
and it's imperturbability.
mm-hmm.
Imperturbability. Why it's a great word is that it's not widely used, so you can stay very focused on a specific meaning, and to be imperturbable is to be unshakable, you know, immovable amid the ups and downs and throes of life, whatever comes at you, you're able to self-stabilize, right? You're able to, like the buoy,
Uh-huh.
atop the
Yeah.
waves, right? You're able to ride them and have your own sense of equanimity, of balance, of continuity despite what's happening around you.
Okay.
I think that's an extremely important quality to cultivate. It's very hard.
Yeah. So how have you done that? It's hard to do. What works for you in that space?
It has a lot to do with self knowledge, which comes from self reflection,
Mm-hmm.
right? Being able to observe the what kind of energy is happening inside you. Am I being reactive? Am I acting from ego? Am I acting from fear? Really being able to examine your inner state. What is causing me to react? And it has a lot to do with connecting with your emotions, which frankly I didn't grow up in that kind of household or that kind of culture. It's been something that's taken a long time, and I've had helpers of different kinds along the way, but it really does come down to reflection, either with a person, a trusted person, a professional of some kind, um, or with yourself, journaling. I do a lot of journaling, and a lot of it is about examining, reflecting upon a situation. I had intended it, to go a certain way. Here's how I thought about it. Here's how I felt about it. Here's what I did about it. Here's what happened, and attempting to reflect deeply without judgment. That's the other thing. So
Mm-hmm.
reflection without judgment. The goal is discernment. So I want to be able to try to see clearly what was happening, what happened externally, what was going on within me, and from that then learn. Are there patterns? Are there things that make me become reactive? Are there people with whom I could seek to have a different kind of relationship? Situations.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think you can develop it without reflection.
Right. And, you mentioned the journaling. I've always felt that one of the big benefits of journaling is not so much the writing down in the moment on that particular day, although that's really helpful. Over the years, I've gotten more benefit from going back and reading what I've written. You talked about patterns,
Hmm.
and seeing the patterns of what was on my mind. And what's really interesting is how did things actually turn out? you know,
Hmm.
whatever I was, anxious about or, ruminating on or whatever, it's that line about, I don't know, can't remember who said it, that you spend so much time worrying about things that never actually happened, and
Right.
the
Yeah.
journaling kind of
Well,
points that out.
projection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There are. So one of the ways I journal, a primary way now, and this has been evolving over time, is using frameworks, and a number of these frameworks are things I also learned from Carol, my mentor. And the value of a framework is that I can think about a situation in advance using a framework,
Mm-hmm.
and then I can reflect using the same framework. And that's part of what helps me stay out of judgment and have discernment and stay out of things like making up stories, fabrication, projection, having a selective memory about what I was actually thinking, going
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
into
Right.
it.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have multiple frameworks, or is there a go-to framework that,
I do. There are many. It's a whole sort of systematics of frameworks.
frankly, I don't remember if we worked on this back in the day together, or if you remember it. I have a framework. There you go, called the Life GPS, and it really
Hmm.
turns on three questions: How am I when I'm in peak performance mode? What's that look like for me? How do I know myself to be? What are the practices or routines in different domains, physical, mental, relational, spiritual, that keep me more in the zone, in terms of how I'm performing? And if I was showing up that way, what outcomes would I expect to see, in different arenas of life, at work for sure, but also at home and just in the community and world in general, right? So it's there's some connection points there, I think,
A lot
between
of
what you just
connection. Yeah.
described. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I want to ask one more question here as we go deep quickly, and then circle back to some of your career experiences and get the lessons learned from some of those. You talked a minute ago about that internal awareness, but also that sense of connection to a source, and you described it multiple different ways.
Mm.
What sort of practices or routines do you have around those bigger life questions or, essentially, why am I here? Those questions of purpose and connecting with, the bigger universal energy source.
There are two different aspects to it for me, and at some point I can share with you a mantra that relates to this if you like. But for the time being, we'll say there's a piece that has to do with purposefulness in the world and feeling that I'm making a meaningful contribution.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to that, it's a combination of knowing myself, trying to really deeply know and understand myself and what I have to uniquely bring and not try to be somebody else or what I think I should be,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is also, a journey over time for
Mm-hmm.
most of us. And then being able to look out into the world and say, what's needed, not just in my immediate vicinity, but in the bigger picture. What is that calling forth for me? What should I pursue to where I feel like I'm contributing to what's nearby, right? Something proximate, a team, a board, a company, etc. But how is that going to ripple out and have those effects in the bigger picture? How can I do this immediate work in a way that's going to ripple out? And if I'm constantly reminding myself of that, then I'm feeling connected to meaning and purpose. To go even farther, is to see something that's not being done and decide to take it on and sort of make a promise to yourself that is a promise you don't know how to fulfill, but you can see that it's something that's
It's a
needed and
need,
then
yeah.
you pursue it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You pursue it with commitment and intensity. And that's very motivating when you believe it's connected to something that's needed in the world.
Right.
On the more inner and spiritual side, right? I think of that as enlivening my spirit and something that has to, be regenerated with practices. And so I come from a Christian tradition, so I have a Christian faith. I also am very, as you know, a curious person and
Mm.
very open minded, and so I explore things from various other faith traditions. But also for me, it's like time in nature,
Mm-hmm.
connecting to the source of creativity,
Mm-hmm.
which has the divine within it from my perspective. Art, music, things that
Mm-hmm.
really enliven my spirit, and I can use that to make a connection to a, a richer source,
Mm-hmm.
of spirit in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can completely relate to that. One of the notes on my own life GPS currently is to do what I can to be a channel for creation, for
Mm,
creative spirit,
yeah,
and keep that channel as open as I can, and
yeah.
not get so full of stuff that I'm not open or available to whatever the creative spark might be.
You know what?
Um,
I was thinking about that right before we got on this
why?
podcast.
Well, there you
How to
go.
know how to be a
Yeah,
channel, because
yeah,
I aspire to that too,
yeah,
right? I
yeah.
mean, I don't really want to do anything that I do for my own ends and purposes or ego.
Uh-huh.
Maybe that's a sign of maturity. I'd like it to be something that actually, is meaningful in the world because it has a positive effect on other people and on systems.
I love it. Okay, there's so many places we could go right now. I want to circle back to China because when you were talking about just a minute ago filling a need that hasn't been filled,
Mm.
that was kind of the China experience was one of those for you, right? So this has been something in your
That
life for
was.
a long time.
Yeah, I'm gonna study Chinese because no one else is.
How long were you in China and what years were you there?
So I studied Chinese undergrad and I spent time in Taiwan during that period. And then in grad school, I did a joint MBA and Master's in International Affairs with a focus on China and East Asia, and studied in Beijing. This was before Tiananmen Square.
Yeah, wow.
So it was
Okay.
that
So
long ago.
yeah,
I mean, really, the country was so undeveloped. I mean, you can't
late 70s,
possibly imagine
80s.
how
Yeah.
different it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, 88.
Okay.
So, you could barely see a car on the road. I mean,
Mhm.
and I feel so fortunate that I was there at that time. And then I lived in Hong Kong for a bit, and then in my early career, I spent a lot of time all over Asia, working for what's now EY, and then Otis Elevator, Arco Chemical. So I was traveling frequently around China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, living in Singapore, going to different places.
Okay. And you eventually ended up at Harley-Davidson. And you were one of the key executives behind what is known as HOG. the Harley Owners Group.
Uh,
And I've read some of your recent writings and looked at some of your talks, and you talk about an organization's stakeholders, customers would be one, Harley riders would be one, as
mhm,
co-creators of value. And
mhm.
you've gained, you're known within people who follow this kind of work as really being an innovator in this space with the Hog Group. First of all, describe Hog a little bit for the folks that maybe aren't familiar with it. Let's just start with that. Tell us what Hog is, what it was, how it got started.
Well, so I need to clarify some points. There are many people who claim to be the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
father of Hog.
Okay,
Okay,
or the mother.
and I was not. I
Yeah.
was not the
Okay.
father or the mother of Hog.
Okay.
Actually, but it's interesting, and I'll tell you why I became a student of Hog. And I'll explain what it was. But I think it's useful to tell the story. So Hog was conceptualized at a time when Harley Davidson was on the verge of going out of business. It was a very dire time for the company, and the executives went to an offsite with a brilliant strategist, and they were looking at, like, what do we have that we can monetize? And there was like nothing except the customer base. So they figured out, and at the time, the people who ride motorcycles in general, a lot of them like to gather, like to ride
Mm-hmm.
together, like to
Mm-hmm.
do things together. But at the time, the available means of doing that were like Hell's Angels, right?
Yeah.
So, so if you weren't into that
Yeah.
flavor of
Right.
gathering,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There wasn't really an alternative. So they were like, okay, well, all we have is our customers, but people like to get together and there's not an alternative. So we're going to create this Harley Owners Group, HOG, and we're going to make it a membership club. We're going to give people the opportunity to pay dues, and that will literally get us cash to buy us a year. And in a
Mm.
year, we need to earn back, their renewal. And if we can do that, now we have, some cash flow that'll keep the
Mm-hmm.
company going.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was truly the original idea.
Mm-hmm.
Um, from there, it took on many other dimensions. Part of why I'm sort of known for talking about Hog is that when I came into the company after working on the international business, I became an entrepreneur. So
Mm.
over a 10-year period, I was given all these like strategic problems where we know we need to do something about fill in the blank, but we haven't quite figured it out. Can you go figure this out? Right. And so part of what I did was really go around and decode everything that had made the company so successful. I came in when it had survived near death and was on the resurgence, but it was still less than a $500 million company,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it was like, okay, we have a loyal customer base, but it's small. It's heavily male. I mean, 9% or so were, of our motorcycles were sold to women. They're getting 1 year older every year. We need younger people. And so, what do we do about that? Designed and developed a rider training business from
Mm-hmm.
scratch that had a very unique business model. And it was unique and it was successful because learning from Hog, what it did was look at the entire stakeholder ecosystem. Who are all the folks who could either be included or excluded in the way that we
Mm-hmm.
go about this? And how do we try to bring everyone in as much as possible, leverage everyone's strengths, make sure everyone is getting some of what they need, right? So that collectively, we have a better outcome, we grow the pie. And so with Rider's Edge, the rider training program, we did that. It was dealer based, so dealers were getting
Yeah.
access to new customers,
Mm-hmm.
but they provided their parking lots. The Motorcycle Safety Foundation could have felt threatened by what we did. We partnered and used their curriculum, but wrapped our experience around it. State motorcycle programs, they were different state by state. We had to partner with them. We figured out how to do training and use their existing instructor base, but also attract new instructors into their instructor base from our ranks of existing customers, and so on and so forth. And so some of the principles I learned from how Hog was designed were principles I used then for Rider's Edge and the museum and a whole series of startup businesses within Harley that became the enthusiast services division.
Mm.
But the key element I would say was understanding that when you're designing for an ecosystem, right, a growth ecosystem, if you will, you can't be looking at transactional value exchange, right? It's relational, it's over time, and there are many sources of value. A dealer wants to be at the forefront, they want status, right? That an instructor wants to give back, they want the opportunity to do that. Motorcycle safety foundation wants integrity. I mean, there are things that people want, and sources and types of value that can be exchanged that are much beyond the financial, and that's really the secret sauce of designing that kind of offering. It's not actually hard, it just requires a very different kind of thinking, and that's what we were really good at in that period when I was at Harley.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as you describe that, my mind is going to Stanford Business School and the design thinking movement, that starts with what's the customer want or need, right? And did you think about it that way? I mean, you're very stakeholder focused. I mean, you had dealers, you had riders, you had instructors. I mean, lots of different stakeholder
Dealers,
groups.
riders, instructors, state program. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And part of what's important in that human-centered design, which I'm very immersed in because when I left Harley, I went to a firm that did that kind of work, is that you're understanding not just the superficial or functional wants and needs, but you're understanding the psychological and emotional wants and needs. And that's how you get to things like uh, status or integrity or, for the customers, we did a lot of deep work with customers, and it was, primarily it was people who are fans of the brand already. They like the values, freedom, adventure, and individuality, but they're looking for self-actualization. They're looking to overcome a challenge, to prove something to themselves for a lot of them. And so we actually designed in very specific elements of the course experience that would really heighten the delivery of those elements.
So Abraham Maslow would have been proud of.
Maslow would have been proud. Yeah. And it was and for me this was actually part of my own journey into more deeply understanding psychology of people and how to use that understanding in a way that wasn't manipulative, right?
Right.
But was actually delivering different kinds of value.
Something that people valued. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so and it paid off. I mean, we used to get fan mail. I would personally get fan mail saying you changed my life. This was the best thing that ever happened. In one of our very first courses, this young woman from Chicago came and asked the dealer in Racine, Wisconsin, if she could camp out at his dealership on the property because she couldn't afford a hotel, but she was determined to take this course. I mean, there were like wild stuff that happened. It was really tremendous.
So you were at Harley a couple of decades ago, roughly.
15 years. I left in 2007.
Okay, so a decade and a half. Since then, and especially from what I'm reading in the last several years, Harley's really struggling. I guess a lot of people diagnose it as their core rider group is aging out of riding big, heavy bikes, right? Your company, your consulting company is called Creative Renewal. They probably need some. If you were parachuting into Harley to help them out, what would be the first thing you'd do today?
Well, I'm loath to go, too deep because I know too much.
Yeah.
Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
But I think, in the period when I left, a lot of people left. And I think what happened for a number of reasons was that they really lost the culture, the stakeholder oriented, customer centric culture. And I've seen this happen to a lot of companies, and often it's a boiling the frog kind of slow phenomenon, and it frequently happens when you lose confidence in yourself for some reason and you start adopting best practices from everywhere else. I mean, Harley, in the time I was there, and it was very successful, right? We grew the top line sevenfold and the bottom line 17-fold in that 15-year period. That's pretty good.
Yeah,
right?
for real.
We created a lot of value for a lot of people, and it wasn't just financial, it was for our whole stakeholder ecosystem. but we were very different. The way we were structured in a very unique and different way. The way we did things was very different from other people. We played our own game. We knew our strengths. We played our own game. And yeah, we made missteps. And over time, certain things eroded and needed to get shored up again. And, you know, it always happens, right? You have to keep renewing yourself and revitalizing. But I think when you start trying to, adopt too many practices from elsewhere, you become a Frankenstein, a Frankenmonster that doesn't have a core and that
Mm-hmm.
isn't differentiated.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can point to a thing like, the customers have been aging. Well, they've been aging since I was there,
Right.
right? They've been aging for 30 years and we were doing things about it, but those things got stalled or they got pared back because I'll tell you one core reason, and this isn't only Harley, but when you're running that kind of organization where the core thing you monetize is the motorcycle. It's
Mm-hmm.
high ticket and it's very high margin,
Mm-hmm.
believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you do all these ancillary things that bond people to the brand and to the motorcycle. They sell more motorcycles, and all those other things we did, parts and accessories, motor clothes, so clothing, licensed products, these different services that I came up with, very few of them were as directly profitable as selling motorcycles. But together they created this incredible engine. They substituted for marketing. It was like a paid form of marketing, right? If I can break even on teaching you to ride a motorcycle and I can get you into the fold 10 or 15 years earlier than you have and keep you much longer, I mean, the payback is tremendous. But if you do a pure, P&L or NPV, financial analysis on that initiative standalone, you're never going to fund it. And sometimes this is what happens is often it's driven by the finance organization. I'm not going to point fingers, but it often is,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where we want everything to stand alone, be the highest possible, compared to the other alternatives. And you're missing the big picture. You're missing the value created in the ecosystem.
Right. You just used the word, you're a systems thinker, right?
Mm.
You look at things as the complete system. And
Yeah,
quite often when you break it down to the component parts, it's what's the line about the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right?
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I think this goes back to this, we've adopted very much, and certainly in the US business arena, this mechanical kind of thinking,
Mm-hmm.
right? We think of businesses as machines. We think of systems as machines. They're not. They're alive. You know, I
Right.
mean, and so we think if we just tinker with the parts, it'll add up, or we can take out a module, tinker with the module, put it back in. It doesn't work that way,
Yeah.
right? Like if you can't work on the whole system, you will suboptimize. I firmly believe that.
Right. So that actually I want to bring us to Orchard Supply Hardware, where you and
Mm,
I met when I was your
yeah,
coach. And so I'll do a quick summary and then you add in the details. Orchard, as I
sure.
recall, was an acquisition by the Lowe's Corporation, the big, huge hardware supply company, and lots of big buildings and big parking lots, Lowe's. And
Yep.
Orchard was sort of the neighborhood hardware store model, and primarily,
Hmm.
I guess, out west, California, and
Hmm.
that region of the United States. And you walked into a pretty big turnaround situation there. Describe the situation upon entry and what you were focusing on during your tenure as CEO. What were you trying to do at Orchard?
Sure. So Lowe's, very big, very successful company, runs big box stores. Home improvement is the focus. And so you can do small projects, but it's also, optimized for taking on very substantial projects, right? Orchard Supply Hardware was a store, as you say, of neighborhood hardware stores. So Lowe's, a Lowe's store might be like 100,000 square feet or 150, right? An Orchard store would be maybe 20,000 or 25 or 15,000, right? So, yeah, different scale. Orchard was founded as a co-op in the 30s in outside of San Jose, where it used to be Orchard Fields,
Hmm.
and it was founded as a co-op by farmers in the Great Depression to get through hard times together. And it always had this like very neighborly, very cooperative, helping each other out, member of the neighborhood ethos. We discovered this later. Orchard had been a co-op and then had gone private and then gone public and then private equity and then was owned by Sears for 15 years and then was spun out of Sears by some people who took it public again and then into bankruptcy. And then Lowe's bought it. And I was not part of any of that. Right. So when it was bought over, I mean, it had not been invested in for a long time. A number of the stores were quite run down, the headquarters and everything. After acquisition, again, I was not yet part of this. The first three big things that were done were to remodel half the stores in about an 18-month period, extend the store footprint. So there were about 60 stores primarily clustered around northern central California, extend the footprint up into Oregon, down into Southern California, and across into Florida without doing anything different to the supply chain. So there was one distribution center in Northern California that's now supporting, that very extended footprint of stores, and simultaneously embark upon an ERP implementation.
Yeah.
So these were three very disruptive things that happened in a very short time in a company that's just been acquired out of bankruptcy, with, you can imagine, a lot of overhead, a lot of SG&A, right, loaded on top by all these investments. So that's what I came into. In addition, as I discovered, the mainly under prior ownership, Sears and the spin out. I mean, these were people who came from big boxes, and they had implemented a lot of systems and practices and thinking, policies, procedures that come from that big box world where you have to run it like a giant machine. I mean, it's run like a military operation. Like things are very systematized, very controlled. Well, that doesn't lend itself to the feeling of a neighborhood store, right? So it was kind of like the origin of the company and what it had originally meant to people and its reason for being, this neighborly store, right, in the neighborhood, had all this stuff, sort of layered over it, these practices that made it more like a big box, so less differentiated, right, or harder to be differentiated. Standardized merchandising, for example, like very regimented ways of providing service to customers. People in the stores weren't allowed to leave their zone of the store. Well, in a big box, okay, but in a 20,000 square foot store, it's like kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
So so anyway, so what I walked into was there were a lot of investment had been made, a lot of good things had been done, new store design, new formats, but the culture and the practices. So I would say the value prop. Oh, and the go to market had adopted a very sort of high low discounting, way of trying to drive traffic. And it was all centered on the circular. So the thing in the newspaper that
Yeah,
if anyone
right.
gets a
Yeah, back when
newspaper
we had
anymore,
newspapers,
right?
yeah.
Back when. So I mean, just think about it. Like all these practices that were just the value proposition was not aligned with the go to market, was not aligned with the practices and procedures, and the cost structure was really problematic. So that's what I walked into.
And so my recollection and all those
which is why I wanted a coach.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole other conversation.
And you're probably getting, flashbacks.
I am
and
actually. I'm
PTSD
resisting
as
the
I talk
urge
about
to.
this
I'm
because it's all
resisting the
coming
urge
back
to,
to
like,
you.
yeah, exactly. But one thing I definitely recall from my experience with you back then was your emphasis on people and building a team and building a culture in the midst of all these really hard business, execution kind of problems, right? And strategy kind of problems. And, your creative renewal company website, your consulting company, you've got a Venn diagram, three circles together, strategy, execution, and culture. What was your goal culturally in the midst of all that?
Yeah. The good news, the good news about the situation, in a way, was that so many things were either broken, like we had a really hideous website that couldn't be
I
fixed
remember.
anytime soon, right?
Yeah.
We couldn't fix it in any reasonable time frame. And the ERP was well underway. The leases for the expansion were signed. So there were so many things that were immovable in a short time that the only thing that can move fast and that can overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles is people and culture. you know and I had been through enough and had enough experience to know that. So the reason to focus intensely on the people and culture was that's what can transcend these immovable obstacles. It was a culture driven transformation that focused a lot on the development of people and getting people deeply connected to our purpose and our customers, right? In a variety of ways. But, we made tremendous results in a very short period of time. I
Yeah.
mean, in the first year, we improved cash flow $100 million on a $600 million business, expanded gross margin 453 basis points, took our net promoter from under 60 to consistently over 80, which is up
That's
there with
very
Costco and
strong. Yeah.
Nordstrom, and
Yeah.
on and on. And we did this while restructuring 2 times, reducing hours in the stores, reconfiguring the whole way that we staff stores, and on and on and on, changing the way we went to market. But all those changes were able to happen so quickly because the focus was on people and culture, developing people, teaching them to be self directing, self reflecting, self correcting, self developing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Within a framework, within a number of frameworks. So back to frameworks. Um, with a very clear idea of who Orchard is and what we stand for, what it is that customers value that they get from us, and the principles by which we are going to operate.
What's the leader?
And
What's
uh,
the senior leader's role? The president's role in fostering that kind of culture?
creating the conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is all about indirect work. And by indirect work, I mean creating conditions. So an aspect of creating conditions is being a role model. But I think of role model in a very specific way, which is I am modeling being self-reflective, being self-directing, taking responsibility. Part of our ethos was operating in a non-hierarchical manner. So I'm going to model all those things. I don't want you to model yourself on me.
Mm-hmm.
I want to, be an embodiment of the principles by which we're going to operate. I'm going to demonstrate and hold myself accountable for if we've defined what is the essence of Orchard and we're going to use that to make all our decisions. I am going to demonstrate that I'm doing that,
Mm-hmm.
right? If we've talked about, we expect everyone to be self reflecting, in everything they do, I'm going to demonstrate that.
Very good. So everybody's different. Everybody has their own unique version of peak performance. What's yours? What's on the short list of words that describes you when you're operating in peak mode?
Well, I mean, you talked about creativity, strategy, and execution. I mean, those are on
There's
my
a reason.
website for a reason. I
Yeah.
mean, that the intersection of those three things is kind of what I bring to any situation, right? I'll see the big picture. I'll strategically navigate toward an end. I'm known for coming up with creative solutions, and I care about execution and getting things done.
Mm-hmm.
I connect that to the two things that really matter to me, right? And one is this connecting people across the things that divide them, building bridges, connecting, people and cultures. And the other is actualizing potential, whether that's in people or organizations or situations. So for me, when I'm at that, bridging divides, actualizing potential, operating from strategy, creativity, and execution, that I think that's my sweet spot. Now it's interesting because I've gone into the field of governance. As you know, I'm spending most of my time now working on boards or with boards, and execution isn't really something boards do,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's very much about that, working indirectly, creating conditions. So over time, my idea of, you know, execution or impact or effectiveness, right, has developed and maybe matured. So if you think back to that framework I was talking about, results, outcomes, and effects, These days, I focus much, much more on effects. How am I creating the conditions for effects and effectiveness?
Well, that brings me to an article or a speech transcript you shared with me. And one thing I learned from reading through that, you and I both have written and spoken about this acronym that's become popular in the last year or two, BANI, B-A-N-I.
Danny.
Brittle. The world is a brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible place. And you recently gave a speech to a conference of corporate directors where you encouraged them to take a cue from the Blue Angels, the Navy's flight demonstration team. And the phrase that the pilots in the Blue Angels use is they want to fly loose. So tell us what flying loose means and how that applies to board members and the conditions they create.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So, I mentioned this, paying attention to creating conditions, and I think it's really it's one of the biggest transitions for people coming onto boards because, they're very we're all right accomplished executives and have been successful by getting things done. Right now, we're on boards and we're there to at least from a legal point of view provide oversight, right, and accountability, fiduciary ethics, hire and fire the CEO and so on, but that's a very limited idea of what a board is there to do. If you think about effects and effectiveness and impact in the world and stewarding the success of an organization over a long time, to my mind, you have to think more about creating the conditions, right, for effectiveness. And so, in the transition from executive to boardroom, it's hard to let go of that impulse, right? To get things to
Execute.
happen, to
Yeah.
work directly,
Yeah.
or to give advice, or even to, ask questions in a way that's more or less actually giving advice, if you know what I mean.
The leading question, leading the witness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, that in that speech, the call to action was to reflect on, everything we do creates conditions. The question you ask, the comment you make, the information you ask to see, the way we go about making decisions, the discussion we're having. And so the notion of flying loose, right? So in the Blue Angels, when they talk about this, they talk about if you hold too tight to your
Shtick.
stick,
Yeah.
right? um,
Yeah.
you actually cause the plane to, tend to respond to the conditions around it in a way that can be dangerous for the formation. If you have a looser grip, you can actually go with the flow of what's happening around and stay on course better with a looser grip. So the idea was for a board, how can we think about, a looser grip as in how thinking about working indirectly, thinking about effects and effectiveness, think about how we're creating conditions, not being as directive, or leading the witness, as you will, in terms of how we interact with management.
What have you learned in your board experience in the last number of years that you wish you had known when you were an executive from all the observation and interactions that you've had? Like, wow, it would have been really great if I'd known that 15 or 20 years ago.
I don't know if I have a good one for that, Scott. I mean, the reason I wanted to move into the boardroom is that I had seen how significant the impact of the board can be, for good or otherwise, in both the actions they take and in the situations where they choose not to act. And I had, seen too many situations of boards not acting, right? And it having really negative multi-generational consequences for companies, employees, communities, extended ecosystems. And it wasn't, to think that I can solve all those problems, but it was like if I'm going to take everything I've learned for 30 some years and do something meaningful with it, I feel like that is something meaningful I can do to go into the boardroom and try to be part of um, you know, effective boards, greater effectiveness.
I know you and I had a few conversations after you left Orchard that was a goal of yours, which you have obviously succeeded in,
Yeah.
Meeting. What's your advice for someone who we could be sitting on a board, a nonprofit board, or maybe a corporate board or a company board or any other goal that's kind of a transition from what they've done. Maybe it builds on what they've done, but it isn't what they've done up until now. But what did you learn through that process of being recruited to be on a board like WD-40? What advice would you offer to people that have their next big goal, but haven't really charted the full path to doing that, to getting there?
Going through a transition of some kind.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it starts with knowing yourself, being really clear on not only what you're good at, but what brings you joy. What do you enjoy doing? Yeah, because to me, if you're gonna make a transition, why wouldn't you make it in service of more enjoyment in your work? Right? So know yourself, understand what brings you joy. Um, think, understand your why. I had my why of going into board work, right? Understand your why, so that you're going towards something, not away from something for sure. And you're doing it with clarity of purpose. When I left Orchard, I mean, I got a lot of calls immediately about CEO roles, come lead this retailer or that retailer. And I thought about it. And I would have enjoyed many aspects of it, but I realized that that wasn't what was going to be most meaningful to me in my next phase. Right. So you also have to think about your why that lets you say no to some things, and that allows you to focus on what you really want to be doing. And then be open to serendipity. So I always think of having a north star. You have a north star, so I wanted to be on mm, be on boards as my next chapter, work on governance. I'm clear on why I'm doing it. I know what I bring to the table. And then you go out, you talk to lots of people, you expose yourself to lots of situations, and different things arise. So don't, fly loose, right? Don't be too controlling in how you try to pursue your next thing, because usually, how it eventually comes about is different from what you expected. And typically better.
So Lara, you mentioned a mantra a little while ago. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, it's a mantra that I've developed in recent years, Scott. It's open heart, awakened mind, strong core, enlivened spirit, and caring community. And these are things that I've realized when I work on them, and in that order, there's a particular order, that work becomes easy, potential becomes available. I can be at my best without a lot of effort. Yeah.
I love that. What does core mean to you in that list of heart, mind, core, spirit, and community?
So strong core for me means things like being clear on my values, but also setting clear aims for myself. So when, if I'm going to pursue something, I have a clear aim that I set for myself, and having rituals. Rituals are part of it, just like a strong core in your body, right? You work certain things and you have a strong core. So if I'm exercising, my body is part of a strong core, but also my values. And so I have rituals. I go to the gym, I journal, I set aims for myself, and I reflect on how I'm doing with pursuing those aims. Those are all part of having a strong core. And my faith is part of my strong core.
Yeah, I'm so glad we've talked about this, because it's really the premise of the show, Best Ever, is that intersection between effective self-management and positive leadership outcomes, right? And so I love it that you've got such a systematic, not surprised, but I love it that you've got such a systematic way of thinking and working with this.
And that leading with open heart is something that the younger me never would have thought that this age me found to be the most important thing. But it has to do with non-judgmentalism, so, toward myself and toward others. And because you can't be discerning, in my opinion, if you're judging. And being non-judgmental is how you're able to perceive reality and work with things as they are, not as you wish them to be, and not get caught up in wishing others to be different from how they are, or blaming yourself for things that you can't do anything about. So that open heart is a really good, important starting place.
Mm-hmm.
And then the caring community on the end, what I mean by caring is people who care enough that they have a commitment to others in the community, to not allow them to not grow and develop, right? So I care enough about you that I'm going to be honest with you, right? So there's sort of self accountability within a caring community means that others will be helping you to be self accountable and to work on your development and to see things clearly and to understand your blind spots, or so it's not sort of a caring is not nurturing in the way that I'm using it. Not that it's
Yeah.
I should say it's not equivalent to nurturing. Nurturing
Right.
could be part of it, but caring is more
You want what's
rigorous.
best for the
Yeah.
other party. Who makes up your own caring community these days?
Well, so I have different caring communities. I have one that works on regenerative business,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I have another that's more enlivening the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is a huge takeaway from our conversation, I'm sure, for everybody listening. Thank you.
Thanks. It's a cool thing I came to. Yeah.
Okay, I could go on and on. Thank you first for reminding me of how much I enjoyed working with you back in the day and why I did, because we would have some very discursive but substantive discussions back then.
Totally.
I
I miss
loved
it
it.
too. It was wonderful.
Yeah. My question I like to ask everybody who comes on Best Ever, what's been in your ears lately? This is my final question. What's been in your ears lately? In other words, what are you listening to that's inspiring you or shaping your thinking or just making you laugh, maybe?
Well, I'm more of a reader than a listener,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a pretty hardcore geek kind of reader. So,
Okay.
um,
What's on your
so
what's on your nightstand or on
well,
your
part so
desk?
part of why I'm interested in working on corporate governance is I've come to believe that people learn to expect in their larger systems of governance what they've experienced in their smaller systems. So what you experience in your family might be
Oh yeah.
what you're willing to accept in your nation.
Mm-hmm.
And then business is a key point of intervention for this. So working on corporate governance in a way is working indirectly on other aspects of governance. So I'm reading The Origins of Totalitarianism.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Man,
Right?
who's the author of that? Is that Snyder or is it?
Hannah Arendt.
Oh yeah, right. Okay.
Right. Um, a fascinating book called The Free World. It's very wide ranging, but it talks about from all aspects like culture, politics, social systems, music, art. It talks about everything sort of that after World War II, how this idea of the free world, in contrast to the unfree world, the communist world,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
came into being and how it permeated every aspect of culture. It's a really fascinating, really good book. And The Dawn of Everything,
I haven't
which
heard of
goes
that one.
back and sort of the dawn of
Yeah,
everything,
yeah.
and it goes back and re-examines sort of how we've learned to think about history in a history through the ages, right? As in a very linear and almost determinate way, like it was meant to unfold this way.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has meant to bring us to this point, and it blows up a lot of our assumptions about how things came to be the way they are.
So, in other words, a pretty light summer reading list for you.
Yeah, that's me. That's me. I
No,
read novels also,
yeah,
but
okay. I love it.
those are just
I love it.
little
Um,
palate cleansers between the heavy stuff.
exactly. The sorbet between the
Exactly.
dawn of the dawn of everything. All
Yeah.
right. Lara Lee, what did I not ask you that you wish I'd asked? Anything?
Oh my gosh. I don't think so. This
Uh,
felt like a pretty invigorating and
yeah, I
wide-ranging
feel that
discussion.
way. Thank you. If people want to learn more about you and your work, where would you point them?
They can email me,
Okay.
Lara.lee at creative-renewal.com.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. It's lovely to see you again. And like I said, this was taken in the Wayback Machine of great conversationalists I've been privileged to work with. You're at the top of the list. So thank you so much.
It was really fun and a great privilege. Thank you for having me, Scott.
Likewise. Thank you, Lara. Some coachable moments from my conversation with Lara Lee. You heard in the interview that Lara and I kind of go way back. I was her coach somewhere between 10 and 15 years ago when she was president at Orchard Supply Hardware. And I experienced her then as I experienced her today. Lara is a very deep, soulful, thoughtful, intelligent, creative, you could go on with adjectives, person. And there's a lot of meat in what Lara has to say. To me, she is a unique leader in that she is very, very execution focused, but also very people focused at the same time. And that she looks at things, as we talked about in the conversation, systemically. It's an entire system that she's looking at. And we talked a little bit during the conversation, not a little bit, actually a good bit during the conversation about a mantra that she's developed for me. And that's really my coachable moment from Lara today, because it's so comprehensive and so systematic, and it's so completely and genuinely reflective of her, that I just think it's a good reference point for anyone. You as the listener of Best Ever, many of you are leaders, many of you are coaches of leaders, or you're team members or parents or whatever it might be. I think her mantra can be shaped and applied to anybody that is looking for some guidance. And we talked in the conversation about frameworks. Her mantra is essentially a framework through which you can look at and operate it in the world, right? So here it is. It's 5 points. It's open heart, awakened mind, strong core, enlivened spirit, and caring community. And she elaborated on several of those points. Like open heart to her means non-judgmental and working with people as they are. Strong core, is, and she made the point that heart, mind, core, spirit, and community in that order, it kind of builds, right? So core is right there in the middle of the 5, or maybe you would expect the core to be. And that's what everything else is built around, right? That strong core. So she has rituals like exercise, going to the gym, journaling for her mental and spiritual growth and renewal, her faith life, her life with faith communities and other things that she does to enhance that. I think she embodied enlivened spirit throughout the conversation. She certainly embodied awakened mind. She's one of the smartest people I've ever met. And then caring community, I thought was really interesting and important. It's not so much nurturing, although that's a great thing. It's caring enough to be honest with people because you want the best for them. And, it's easy sometimes to just focus on all the positives. Oh, you're doing great. Well, and you don't actually think they're doing great. But you know what? I think you could be better. And here's how and why. And maybe even more, here's the offer I want to make to help. And so caring community can look like a lot of things, but I thought it was a brilliant one to end her 5-point mantra with. So many other coachable moment candidates in this conversation with Lara. We're going to have a lot in the show notes. She's clearly a people connector. She's all about actualizing potential. We talked a little, had a brief reference to Maslow and the hierarchy of needs and self-actualization at the top of the pyramid. That's Lara Lee. She's all about actualization for the organization she serves as a director, that she's served as an executive, and really in her own life. Purpose-driven person, and constantly reflecting on what that means to her and continually asking and answering the question, why am I here? So thanks to Lara Lee for a wonderful conversation. If you want to know more about her website is creativerenewal.com. You can Google that. And thank you for listening to Best Ever. If you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to follow Best Ever on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review and a comment on this episode. I want to know what's landing with you, and your engagement really helps others discover the show. And if you're looking for more on how self-management fuels lasting leadership impact, connect with me through evelingroup.com. I've learned it takes a village to make a podcast. Thanks to executive producer Cece Huffman and editor Mark Meyer, both of Wavestream Media. And thanks to my other team members, Lindsay Russell, Mary Moats, Sophia Shum, and Diane Eblin. Best Ever is a production of the Eblin Group. Thanks for listening to Best Ever, and until next time, keep taking those small steps that lead to your best ever outcomes.